So perhaps you can tell us a few words first on Agile Capital, and then your view on the evolution on the currency, so as a mean of payment.
Okay. So I have a banking background, and I'm an engineer, so I like banking and technology. That's why I'm in fintech. Just to talk about the subject, we're talking about means of payments here. I'm going to begin to present a little bit the problem. Let's take Tunisia, and then we can generalize. Tunisia, we have about 250 billion dinars of payments per year. 250 billions. It's perhaps 2-3 times the GDP in a lot of African countries. Half of it is done through banks, and half of it is done through cash. And the half that is done through banks, as we saw this morning, it was presented by the central bank, about 70% is done by checks, you know, the banking check, 1% through cards, and then you have the other means of payment. So, the reason that was presented this morning, the reason why people use 70% of payments that go through banks are done through checks is because it's the only peer-to-peer payment method. If you leave cash aside, we're going to go back to cash. So if you are in a banking system, if you're looking for a way to pay peer-to-peer between two people who don't know each other, you just write a check. If you trust the guy, you will accept the check. If you don't trust him, you will not accept the check. And these are some problems that we face today. So then you have the cards, 1%. In European countries and a lot of other countries, mature countries have 90%, 95%, even more of people having cards. So now, like in Sweden, they are going to the step where they encapsulate the card in a phone and use a phone like Apple Pay or Swish or whatever to pay, but using the infrastructure of the card, because people have cards. So, but in Tunisia and in a lot of African countries, we don't have cards. At least 1% of transactions through cards. So, and we have 50% of cash. So what do we do? So the option is to invest massively on the card infrastructure, try to equip everyone with cards, to try to reach the level of more mature countries like Europe, US, or even Asia, or you try to find something else. The other problem is in cash, you have a lot of other problems. You have financial inclusion. Cash, you can only pay in proximity. You cannot pay remote. So e-commerce, all of these activities, you cannot do them with cash. You have cash and delivery, but you have a lot of defaults and a lot of problems. You have fraud. You have terrorism funding. You have a lot of problem, traceability. Problem with cash. So here, our society is facing a huge problem and payments. So what do we do? The classical approach is to say, banks, please try to open accounts to people, more and more people, and equip them with cards or means of payment so they can increase their financial inclusion, increase their capacity to pay on remote. But there is another idea, and here I want to present some of the work we are working on, is to digitalize the cash. So if you take a banking note or a coin, 1 dinar or 1000 francs CFA or whatever, and you digitalize it, you create another form of cash. So you have the banking notes, you have the coins, and you have a digital coin. And here, the only technology that allows to do peer-to-peer transactions peer-to-peer transaction with digital coins is called blockchain. And here we see that if we know how to use this technology, we can tackle a huge problem in our societies, at least in MENA region. Here I'm not talking about Europe. and other countries where payments is not a problem anymore. But here it's still a big problem. So why blockchain is a good solution to consider to face this problem? As I said, it's peer-to-peer. So a blockchain, to remind you quickly, it's globally 4 components. You have the, first you have the ledger. The ledger is somewhere where you have all the transactions are written, and everyone trusts that that ledger is mutable, we can trust that ledger, make it simple. So that's, to make it easy, that ledger needs to be managed by an institution or someone that is already trusted by people. Second component is what we call the consensus mechanism. Especially here, we're talking about the governance of the ledger. Who decides a transaction is valid or not? So that's the consensus mechanism. Third component is what we call the asset, then crypto asset, cryptocurrency, whatever. It's a coin, a digital coin representing a real value. It can be 1 dinar, it can be 1 euro, it can be whatever we want. You have existing assets and new assets like Bitcoin, Ethereum, whatever. And fourth component is the network of people, of millions of people who are going to exchange transactions. So if we choose a network of citizens, an asset of an existing currency like the dinar, a mechanism, consensus mechanism where you have a central bank deciding, only one who decides that a transaction is valid or not, and the ledger is controlled by that central bank, you have digital cash. And that's today technically possible, and there are people working on that. So if the coming months and years, there are 3 problems that we're going to manage the governance between central bank and banks, because to make a system succeed, you have to keep the existing interests before and then disrupt when everyone understands the system. So governance, interoperability means that if there are many networks, how they exchange transactions, and scalability. If you want to have a solid payment system in a country, you need a system that can manage millions of transactions a day. So it needs to be very strong. So if we resolve these 3 problems and we implement a blockchain that with these specifications, we have digital cash. And then with digital cash, so it's a peer-to-peer method of payment between people. It uses basically a smartphone. The good thing about it is the smartphone and the internet connection is owned by the citizen, by the client. So it's a fixed cost system. So 1 million transaction or 1 billion transactions is the same cost. It's only the cost of internet. And then you have, if you succeed to put that, you have another layer. Imagine you create a dinar for health only. A dinar that can be accepted only by doctors, pharmacies, clinics, hospitals, and all the ecosystem of people working in healthcare. And the good thing about it, it's less correlated to inflation. It means that you can create 10 billion dinars of health, and you give them to people, and the system works. So it gives central banks completely another way of seeing economy and society. You can, working, financial inclusion, social development, healthcare, education, as Kamran talked about it this morning. You create the same dinar, it's 1 dinar, but you can use it only in 1 region. With what is nice also with digital coins is it can be geolocalized. Even if you don't have an identity of the people exchanging, you know where it happens, at what time. So you can give geographic scope where you say this coin can be used only in this region. So you have another way of considering economy and economic problems with digital cash. And from my point of view, I think, in our economies and African economy, it's too difficult, very long, to invest in old infrastructures to try to reach the level of European and American countries, and then to use Apple Pay and whatever, then to say, look, let's digitalize the cash. Everyone is used to cash. We will have smartphones as wallets. It will be anonymous, but we have the traceability, and we have the programmability, we have the scalability, we have everything. So I think I'm deeply convinced that it can be a very, very quick way for our economies to go directly to leapfrog to the next generation of payments, and not to stay and try to develop what is existing in other countries and we are not succeeding to achieve after tens of years. So digital cash, I think, is the solution.
Yeah, just before to go to some of the questions of the in the room, but what you are describing is, I mean, I'm sure that some of you have already been traveling in Asia. If you take for Baidu, one of the Chinese company is already having a Baidu Health currency, so where you can go to Baidu doctors and so on, or Alibaba with Alibaba Pay is also providing that, and you can have already some coins or electronic coins when you are a child with just a phone when you are living in Shanghai. Why? So I mean, it's just a naive question. Why those things are not already arriving to Tunisia and to Northeast Africa?
I don't know, but that's it's not. But I can tell you here what I'm talking about is the national currency issued by the central bank, but in a third form: banknotes, metal coins, and digital coins. I'm not what you are describing, what exists in China by WeChat or whatever. We are in the scriptural money. We are in the banking system, and it's a payment method related to the KYC procedures, to all the existing infrastructure. It's not issued, at least at my knowledge, it's not issued by the state. It's issued by. So here we have to find a solution between giving the ability to people to issue their own money. So here we talk about Bitcoin, Ethereum, all the altcoins and the forks and whatever, and they do their ICO and they exchange their own money. And here you have the regulation question and all of these questions. Or on the other side, say the central bank will issue the national currency pegged. The digital form is the same as the banknote. So that's the idea.
Yeah, well, some of you haven't been speaking. Yep.
Thank you very much. So for your interventions. So I would like to build up on Ms. De Gaulle comment, actually, that indeed cryptocurrency is still a young technology and we don't know the full potential of it. And as Mr. Rayon mentioned, maybe end users do not want the blockchain technology after all. But do they actually know about it? Because in reality, there's a lack of education and knowledge about this technology. I know it because I work on blockchain and cryptocurrency, and we are educating people on it here in Tunisia, and people do not even know what it means. And of course, since we are here in the central bank with people, professional people in the industry, we maybe have a different point of view on it. And I very much like the national solutions, like the one presented here in Tunisia, but what about cross-border transactions? And the reality here in Africa, in Tunisia, is that 40% of people are unbanked and do not have access to financial services. And if we count people that have like poor financial services, we have maybe 70 to 80% of people that are unbanked if we count poor financial services. So maybe I would like to know the vision of Natalie on CBCC and what's your vision on it? Could it be a reality? Is there projects right now working on this kind of central bank cryptocurrencies? And could it really be possible very soon? Thank you very much.
So Natalie, your turn.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you for your question. So there are three different types, again, I think, for currencies. So you have the digital currency, which happened already, I think, in Ecuador, so in Central America, where it's a centralized ledger. So, you know, it's managed. It's a private system managed by central banks. And it's just a representation of Ecuador. So that's something already happening in Ecuador. I believe that the Marshall Islands just launched something like last week, maybe, the SOV. So it's happening just since a week. So we will need to see the 2.4 million SOV were just issued last week. So we'll see what happens with that. Now you have the CBCC, so like using blockchain, so private blockchain, or maybe let's dream public blockchain one day. So private blockchain, we already mentioned it a little bit, especially with the BIS. So, you know, the permission is private, so it's really a tool used for monetary policy by private banks. It can be, you know, something which is already, you know, you have like legacy system, you can already use it for some central banks in some country. I mean, I think the new technology, the innovation regarding that will be to maybe in the future use a public blockchain. So you already have what's called stablecoins initiative. So with using public blockchain to issue some sort of cryptocurrency, you have the Tether, so pegged on the US dollar, or you have the DAI, so they are pegged on Ethereum, actually, Ethereum blockchain. So this is all very technical, and I'm not going to lose everybody because it's almost 5 p.m. and we all want to listen to the conclusion. But I mean, it's already happening. Marshall Islands, Barbados, Singapore thinking about it. I think Japan has strong reflection. Yeah, Venezuela, of course, with Petro. Yeah, Venezuela already launched the Petro. You're perfectly right, sir. So Marshall Islands and many, well, Tunisia, you know, so it was not a central bank, but it was already an initiative with La Poste. So you do have central banks thinking about it. You have the BIS thinking about the whole paradigm around it. And it's an ongoing movement happening right now. And we're all here to think about the future. And, you know, Banque de France launched their private blockchain. So it's all happening right now, actually. And we're very proud to be part of it.
Yeah, we'll be able to take one or two questions.
So I'm really sorry, but because we are speaking about challenges, and I will be a type of speed reducer. So as a lawyer and legal specialist, my question will be in the legal field. As with every technology or revolutionary technology, there might be some new functionality that might change or might create some problem with the established functionalities and established regularities. So my question is, can we have an answer from Banque de France or from Mr. Exactly about about the state of respect of personal data, of respect of enforceability of smart contract, intellectual properties, jurisdiction, how we can imagine such the situation of the actual regulatory and the proposal of jurisdiction like Japanese one or French one. Thank you.
As the Banque de France is just here, we'll we'll ask him.
Okay, so many questions. I'm not sure to answer all your aspect of your question. Just to speak about our initiative to launch a blockchain with banks. In fact, the use case and the situation was quite really easy, just because the relationship between Banque de France and banks to manage this repository, in fact, it's a share repository. It's just a contractual one. So that means we don't need any regulation to put in place a blockchain. It's just, we put lawyers together, and it's just a contract we have with banks. So the situation was really, really easy. But second point, in this blockchain, there is no personal information, no personal data stored in the blockchain. So it's quite easy to implement. Of course, we have chosen this use case because it was really easy to implement. But we know that there are a lot of questions open about personal data protection, about regulation and value, of course, of the assets in the blockchain. So in my answers, I would say that it's really important to go further with the blockchain, to have a very business-friendly regulation. And some states in the world took orientation just to promote very friendly regulation. In France, we have quite a friendly regulation for that. And I don't know if I told this morning, but we have a regulation that allows to use blockchain for unlisted securities. And so this will, of course, foster a market using blockchain. Yes, but of course, all the question about money laundering, financing the fraud, and so on, I cannot answer. I don't have all the answer about this. What we consider is that the technology is going very, very fast, and that we will be able in a few months, in a few years, to use even public blockchain with a very high level of security, a very high level of confidentiality, and it could be used for new use cases and probably for crypto assets, new cryptocurrencies, I don't know, but something that could be used at a very large scale. So I don't think that we have all the answers to your question, but we have to go forward, and using the capabilities of the technology, we will have new use cases and more ambitious use cases that could be implemented.
Yeah, Hubert, you wanted to add something to that? No?
Yep. It's more like a comment that also to the question you mentioned, because you mentioned the Chinese use case, and also you mentioned the leapfrog. The one really interesting thing that I observed, that you actually so far have seen 3 different kind of leapfrogs. So the most, let's say, Euro one is the one we had in China. So actually everyone who use Alipay or Baidu Pay, whatever, they have a bank account. It's just they use the digital money. So it's not super... e-money, and then you have the M-Pesa one, that actually you don't have a bank account, you just use your mobile phone number. And then the third is like your jump, it's like really far away, so completely like sort of remove the current like the money and use this completely like blockchain based money to, and on this platform you can grow like different like the ones you mentioned for healthcare, for education. So that's actually completely different from what we've observed in China, because in China that's actually not really ambitious. It's just more like a digitalized form of the Chinese currencies. And the ones you mentioned, it's issued by the corporate. It really has nothing to do with the government. And government actually, they took a pretty conservative sort of position in this crypto trends right now. Yeah.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Abdallah Naili, being involved for a number of years with central banks. I would like to share a few comments and also ask you a few questions on your presentations. Two keywords that were mentioned, in my opinion, were incentive and adoption. And I explain why I think it's interesting. I've been working with central banks around cash, physical cash. So for 10, 12 years, I've worked with printers, commercial printers, and security features providers to really secure cash in a different way and make it more and more efficient. After a while, with some friends, we've decided to invest actually on cryptocurrencies. So I came into that world and started to really dig into the technologies and how it's working. Few of the projects that you have mentioned, I've actually also been involved in. I've been to Banco de Uruguay. I was involved in that project, and I wanted also to share some of the feedback. In my view, it's interesting to have BIS sitting with us today, and thank you for that. It's not easy to have you. But I think we have to put all this in perspective with central banks, from a central bank point of view. When cryptocurrencies or virtual assets really became so popular, the value was really frightening central banks. And that's where central banks all over the world decided to, we have to really study that and take a position. What do we do with it? And to actually comment on some of your comments, digital currency does already exist indeed. You have 2, 3, 4 companies in the world who are still relatively small, but who have developed solutions. Jory Digital, eCurrency. Jory Digital is in Uruguay. eCurrency have been traveling all over the world trying to convince central banks to move into digital currencies, not on blockchain technology. Now, blockchain is becoming hype. There are a lot of advantages, and some central banks, I will name Central Bank of Azerbaijan, 3, 4 weeks ago have issued a tender on blockchain technology. So the question is, if you go to the first aspect of it, digital currency, Uruguay case was interesting. They have not issued it officially, but it's a pilot, and the adoption is very low, like what happened in Tunisia, and I'm happy that it was mentioned earlier. When the e-dinar was launched, it's a fantastic project, but at the end of the day, the incentive, the adoption of the public was not the one expected. So I truly agree with what was said, the fact that digital money, whether it's on conventional technology or on blockchain, is a new format. It could make things much faster, secure, of course, from a central bank point of view, even more traceable. However, I don't think that without incentives from central banks, the technology providers will be able to really have solutions that would be working, successful, and adopted. And of course, a secure custodian is even the next step. But my question would be, from a BIS point of view, where do you see blockchain as an advantage for central bank? First, for currency, for efficient monetary policies, but also for all the administration aspect. Thank you. Sorry if I was a bit long.
So Takeshi, I think it's it's yours.
Yeah, it's a very tough question, and so it's not easy for me to come and then so to answer all these questions. But I think, in my personal view, one potential area that the Bitcoin and the blockchain technology can make a difference is again cross-border retail payments. So I think for this region and for other regions in the world, so the cross-border remittance is a big source of actual income, and then for many African countries, I think it really corresponds to few percentage of the GDP annually. So it's a very important source of income for these countries. But then yet the cross-border retail payments are very slow, expensive, and opaque. So very not transparent. And then our colleagues mentioned interoperability several times, and then bank industry is notorious for not having interoperability among themselves. So I think the Bitcoin technologies and the blockchain technology and also DLT solutions can be more interoperable, and then I think that it could offer better actually cross-border retail payments with cheaper prices, and then that's a potential area. I want to look at it in the future, and then as a BIS and the also central bank community committee, we are rather sort of a wait and see mode, and a bit bit of a sometimes bit cautious about all the development in this area. But in my view, it's sort of a Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies first generation of Bitcoin and the cryptocurrencies. I think in the future they will come back stronger, and then so I think they will evolve further. That's a very important aspect, and then we have to be sort of monitoring and also listening to the industry and with open-minded. So that will be my answer. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it answers partially to the question, but there was one point you wanted to add on the incentive and how to have those currencies or more used.
Yeah, just for the Chinese case, as you said, most of the people here in Tunisia and other African countries are not banked. So any system based on bank will take even more time for adoption. And adoption, you have to follow some principles. If you say to a lot of actors of the payment ecosystem, we're going to replace you all, they're going to resist, and it's not going to work. But here you have the trust, so if it's presented and the information comes from these institutions that people trust, like central banks and governments first, then they need to have the information, and then the ecosystem needs to find benefits by using this new form of cash. And by the way, payments, people pay each other, but in a lot of payments, one of the two sides of the transaction is the state itself. So if we begin by paying people salaries, installments, reimbursement for health, spending, all of these things come in a digital cash format in a phone, it will represent a big chunk of the cash in the system, and then it's going to rotate. And there are a lot of action to do, but it's like all marketing systems. You need to put marketing actions to make a system succeed.
The government will be in the auditorium. We will close through some closing remarks. We invite you to join us in the auditorium of the morning. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we'll just take one last reaction. I'm sorry, we'll, the time is there.
I just want to differentiate between electronic money and digital currency. Electronic money is mainly issued by maybe banks, but mostly by non-banks, versus a reserve of cash. So this is similar to Alipay, similar to M-Pesa, similar to everyone. Cryptocurrency is not based on any cash, and it's not actually in the cases we have, like Bitcoin, it's not against any asset. So this is one point. The other point is related to CBDC, central bank digital currency. I think it needs very thorough thinking and risk assessment. I cannot understand it's an easy decision by a central bank. Because the role here of the central bank should be clearly identified, whether this is the issuer only, or the issuer and the operator. And if not the operator, then who should be the operator? This is the commercial banks or someone else, because I don't expect that a central bank issued currency will be a permissionless system. So anyone can have money, and the bank does not know who is owning this money. So if it is actually the issuer and the operator or in charge of the platform in somehow, then you are actually moving some of the functions of the commercial banks, including the AML and KYC, to the central bank, which is not its job. And at the same moment, this implies more risks, because if any money laundering or financing terrorism happen through this digital currency, then the liability will go to the central bank, which is actually should not be in that position. So it needs very crucial, I can say, analysis. The rules should be very clear, and there should be a clear governance for such CBDC. Thank you.
Yep, I think, okay, we'll take the last one. I think then we'll have to.
You're absolutely right. We are working on this since months now, and all the questions that you gave are exactly the problem. And I assure you that we have answers. But we are not talking about Bitcoin here. We're not talking about permissionless, about public blockchains. We are talking about digital coin issued by central banks, like today central bank issue fiduciary money. The distributors will be the same. All the licensed institutions like banks, payment institution, all of these. So the main principle here, we don't change the regulation and we don't change the ecosystem. We just add a new form of money, fiduciary money, and you'll see everything works.
So, I mean, we will finish that, and we will leave this question to the governor to answer us in a few minutes. So I invite everybody to go downstairs, and governor, you know you have the first question.
C'est quand même étonnant que... Non, vous avez été très techno.